State House studio in Montgomery. I'm Todd Stacy. Welcome to Capitol Journal. I hope you and your family had a wonderful 4th of July holiday, perhaps enjoying the performances and fireworks from Washington on a Capitol 4th here on APT. It was quite a show. A scary accident Thursday for one state senator and a reminder of the dangers out on the water. State Senator Garland Gudger of Coleman was injured in a jet ski crash with his son. The senator suffered broken ribs and internal bleeding, causing first responders to airlift him from Smith Lake to UAB Hospital in Birmingham, where he is currently in the intensive care unit. Senator Gudger's wife, Heather, released a statement saying that the prognosis for recovery is good. She said, quote, "From the first responders who were quickly on the scene, to the members of the helicopter airlift unit, to the doctors and nurses at UAB, and everyone else who has assisted during this accident, we offer our deepest thanks and recognition that each of them kept a difficult situation from becoming even worse. To those across the state who has reached out and lifted up our family with their prayers of mending and comfort, we feel your support and know that God holds Garland in his healing hands," end quote. And we here at APT want to offer our heartfelt prayers to Senator Gudger for his full recovery. You're in our thoughts, and we look forward to having you back here in studio very soon. An alarming announcement at the State Department of Education this week. State Superintendent Eric Mackey said the department was targeted in a cyber attack in June. The attack was stopped by state internet security workers, but not before some student and teacher data was breached. Mackey said the department is investigating the scope of how much data was accessed and said he couldn't comment publicly about the nature of it on advice from legal counsel.
On June 17th, our information services team interrupted an attempted hack on the department. They did interrupt and stop the hack, and the hackers were not able to fully access our system or to lock us out of our system. However, before our information services professionals were able to interrupt and stop the hack, some data were breached, we believe, and we began immediately to mitigate the circumstances. We'll be able to say, though, all services have been restored.
More developments this week on the long legal battles over medical marijuana. 3 years after Alabama's medical cannabis law was enacted, products still aren't available to patients. Yet another court hearing was held this week. Jeff Sanders has more.
It's been nearly 3 years since the legislature passed the Compassion Act. The goal was to provide medical cannabis for patients suffering from ailments such as chronic pain, cancer-related symptoms, Parkinson's disease, and more. However, constant legal battles over the licensing process by the Alabama Medical Cannabis Commission has held up medical cannabis from getting into the hands of those who need it.
And frankly, that's why this process has taken so long.
Will Somerville is an attorney representing Alabama Always. He blames the AMCC on delaying medical cannabis, not the companies suing them.
The commission has never followed the Administrative Procedure Act, ever. And what I heard in there today was they're not going to follow it going forward. But at the end of the day, if due process isn't satisfied, then there are going to be people complaining that they didn't get due process, and that's going to delay the process even further.
Alabama Always is among 30 companies that applied for an integrated license. Those are companies that can cultivate, process, transport, and dispense medical cannabis. However, by law, only 5 companies can receive a license. Attorneys for Alabama Always and several other companies denied a license went before Montgomery County Circuit Court Judge James Anderson. During the hearing, Anderson said he would deny the AMCC's motion to dismiss a new case in the litigation. But he asked parties in the case to propose an order that would allow for investigative hearings on licenses without altogether halting the process of getting products to the market.
If I think that so-and-so who got a license isn't qualified to get a license, I should be able to point that out, go to a hearing with them, and challenge them and make them put up or shut up about can they satisfy the requirements of the Act.
By the end of the 2.5-hour hearing, Anderson indicated he would issue another temporary restraining order against the AMCC. Reporting from Montgomery, I'm Jeff Sanders for Capitol Journal.
Over the last few years, lawmakers here in the State House have enacted laws seeking to protect law enforcement officers in what can be dangerous criminal landscape, especially when deadly drugs are involved. Randy Scott reports part 2 of his focus on fentanyl.
I put the uniform on every day I come to work, and I love every minute of it.
Montgomery County Deputy Sheriff Skylar Campbell nearly lost his life doing the job he loves, keeping people safe and fighting crime. It was April 16th, 2022. While conducting a traffic stop, he was exposed to the drug fentanyl.
Because with that fentanyl or the opioid overdose, the only thing that can reverse that is the drug Narcan or naloxone, and it is something that it only reverses the effects of an opioid overdose. And we at the Montgomery County Sheriff's Office all carry that in our vehicles.
Deputy Campbell says it's also their duty to protect fellow deputies and other law enforcement officers while on the job. Fellow deputies who are there to save his life.
We go through rigorous trainings within law enforcement to make sure that ourselves and our other brothers and sisters in blue, as we say, make it home safe too. So anything we can do to save and preserve life, especially when it's in law enforcement, another law enforcement brother or sister is top priority.
He adds, because opioids are now found in the community, it's taking a bigger effort and a bigger team to fight this problem.
If you see any kind of activity in your neighborhood, out in the public in general, that would alert you to think that there is some kind of narcotics activity going on, alert your authorities, alert your local authorities.
Deputy Campbell says more steps are being taken.
When it comes to fentanyl and talking specifically about fentanyl, laws have been put into place to make sure that if someone is caught with that they understand that they're fixing to pay the consequence for what they have done.
Also joining in this fight, state leaders from Montgomery.
I think that our legislators and our lawmakers have done a really good job recently in doing and implementing those things to protect the law enforcement officers, to protect the citizens. Because when those people get caught with the fentanyl or the dangerous drugs, they go away for what they've done.
In Montgomery, Randy Scott, Capitol Journal.
Speaking of fentanyl, the first charges have been filed under a new Alabama law cracking down on fentanyl trafficking. The Baldwin County District Attorney on Monday charged 4 people with manslaughter after a young woman died last weekend in a fentanyl overdose in Orange Beach. They'll be among the first to face prosecution under a law that carves out a specific manslaughter charge for those who sell or distribute fentanyl that leads to an overdose death. The suspects are 22-year-old Madison Lee Hayek from Silver Hill, 25-year-old Malia Autumn Decatur of Spanish Fort, 27-year-old Gerald Lee Anderson III from Spanish Fort, and 32-year-old Rochelle Michael Benson from Bruton. The district attorney's office said that investigators uncovered electronic communications between the deceased and the drug dealers showing their involvement. The 2 lawmakers who led the effort for the fentanyl manslaughter law, State Representatives Chris Pringle and Matt Simpson, said it was a sad situation, but hopefully justice can be served. On a more hopeful note, this July 4th week, Governor Kay Ivey released an Independence Day message to Alabama. In it, she said improving education and teaching children about the history of our country is the best way to preserve it.
248 years ago, our founding fathers declared our independence from British rule, laying the foundation for a nation built upon the great American dream. But our responsibility to maintain our patriotic ideals goes beyond our unwavering support for the armed forces. It extends to how we educate our children and prepare them to be informed, engaged citizens. And that begins with us reminding our students how great our country is. Thomas Jefferson said it best: the cornerstone of democracy rests on the foundation of an educated electorate. Folks, the message here is simple. In order to preserve our democracy, providing our students with a proper education is key. We must teach our students about our nation's history, the bravery of our founding fathers and those who fought for our freedoms, and the principles that defined us: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. This is how we empower the next generation to uphold the torch of freedom and build a brighter future. We are the land of the free, the home of the brave, and the greatest nation on this earth. Never forget that.
Coming up in our interview portion of the show, I'll be talking with Finance Director Bill Poole about the latest revenue numbers that Healthcare Sciences High School going up in Demopolis, and the latest with Innovate Alabama. Also joining me is Signal pollster John Rogers to go over some of their post-debate poll numbers, some really interesting data. And something fun for this Independence Day week, Alan Miller of the American Village in Montevallo is in studio alongside a special guest, the second President of the United States, John Adams. Yeah, John Adams. We'll get his thoughts on the Declaration of Independence and more. Stay with us.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal podcasts. Keep up with what's happening with Capital Journal.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. Joining me next is Bill Poole, Director of Finance for the state of Alabama. Mr. Director, thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you, Todd. Good to be here.
Well, it's a good time to have you on for many reasons. We'll get to all the things you're involved in. But today, or this week actually, we reported on some updated revenue numbers for the state's coffers. We kind of do this monthly, seeing the revenue numbers come in, and looked pretty positive. I mean, of course, we're coming off the sugar high of COVID funds and all that kind of thing, but it looked relatively stable and a little bit of growth.
Well, it is, and we've been monitoring the revenues closely, of course. That is one of our responsibilities in the Department of Finance and our Executive Budget Office. And those monthly reports are critical. We're approaching the end of the fiscal year, so only a couple months to go. We've had a positive fiscal year to date. Saw some positive numbers for the prior month. Of course, there are timing anomalies that always can cause spikes on one month over the other based upon whether revenues are coming in or refunds are going out, and there are a lot of moving parts. But we're very pleased as it relates to the revenue in both budgets right now. We are coming off kind of the spikes and the historic highs generated by the pandemic and the relief and the stimulus and all those things that contributed to that, but we remain very stable in the state, and we're fortunate in that regard.
Well, yeah, and speaking of those COVID funds, from the very beginning, starting with CARES Act, going into ARPA, y'all had this refrain of we've got to be responsible. Mm-hmm. We cannot just spend all this, and especially not create new programs that it would suddenly be budget line items. Are you satisfied that between the governor's office, your work at finance, and the legislature, that goal was accomplished?
So I am, and that's been a recurring theme. And I think significant credit to the governor, to legislative leadership, the budget chairman for being disciplined during that period of time particularly. Really going back a span of time, there's been significant discipline in terms of managing the budget, making wise investments, setting aside reserves, and paying down debt. But I think maintaining that discipline through the relief, the ARPA funds, the resulting budgets has been challenging sometimes. But I think the state is going to be in a better position going forward as a consequence of that. And so, for instance, the ARPA funds and continuing to invest substantial dollars of the ARPA relief funds into water and sewer projects around the state, broadband projects around the state. We've seen the state already leap from from approximately 48th in the country as it relates to broadband coverage to the mid-20s. Those projects are not even fully implemented yet, so I think we'll see that number continue to improve. So that's really benefiting the state of Alabama. And I think it really puts the state on a solid trajectory from a fiscal standpoint, but also from an economic standpoint. Historic investments in education, seeing some positive education signals right now as it relates to third grade reading and math scores. So here again, working very hard, have been for a while, hopefully seeing some fruits of that labor, but making wise investments that are sustainable into the future.
Yeah. You know, we also reported on some of those Lowndes County water and sewer projects, and it's good to see the actual fruits. Like you said, it's one thing to pass a bill, one thing to put it in a budget, but when you see the investment going into the ground, that's got to be gratifying.
It is.
Well, speaking of budgets, you know, we're sort of in the so-called legislative off season, but of course y'all work all year round. But as you mentioned, approaching the end of the fiscal year, is now about the time that you're also considering and crafting the budget for the next legislative session? How does that process work?
Well, you're always thinking, you're implementing, you're monitoring, and you're forecasting, kind of all simultaneously. We're presently in the fiscal year 2024. We'll begin fiscal year 25 on October 1st, and we're already thinking about the fiscal year budget FY26. So you kind of always have three timelines recurring at once. So as we monitor revenues, we forecast, and we think ahead. This fiscal year, we end at the end of September. My office is already beginning to field requests, meeting with agencies on a preliminary basis. We're not in full swing yet on the budget drafting process, but certainly a lot of the work that leads up to we will meet with every single agency, dozens and dozens and dozens of meetings to hear what are their needs, what are their concerns, what programs are expiring that we can pull back, what investments need to be made, which of those are recurring, which are one-time investments. So a lot of complexities, a lot of hard work that goes into that process. But the work of the Finance Department, the work of the Executive Budget Office, it is a constant work all throughout the calendar year, all throughout the fiscal year, and we're right in the middle of it right now.
Interesting. Switching gears, we were both in Washington, D.C. last week. I was given kind of a legislative update. You gave a really interesting update on the healthcare high school, health sciences, Alabama School of Health Sciences in Demopolis. And look, we've covered this a lot, really the last 2 years, as it's been a legislative and budget issue. And sometimes we get caught up in just, pass, fail. This budget passes, this bill passes. But I was really intrigued by your presentation because it just seemed to me that there's a lot more depth to this healthcare high school than maybe I had really appreciated. So can you talk about that, maybe the overall vision?
Sure. Well, the healthcare high school really is not a new model in Alabama in the traditional sense. We have 3 specialty residential high schools in the state. They're all incredibly successful and wonderful assets for the state of Alabama. The School of Math and Science in Mobile, the School of Fine Arts in Birmingham, and the School of Cyber and Engineering in Huntsville. But what we know in Alabama is we have an acute shortage across all sectors of our healthcare kind of workforce, whether that's doctors all the way down to administrators, to workers, technicians, nurses, you name it, we have very acute shortages. Those shortages are most acute in rural Alabama. So recognizing that with the governor's leadership, really began thinking about 3 to 4 years ago, what can we do to move the needle as it relates to healthcare workforce? A lot of times we talk about rural hospitals and their struggles, and I'll include in that context rural nursing homes, rural dentist's office, rural healthcare clinics. I mean, you name it in the rural areas. We talk about some of their financial struggles, and those are very real and they exist. But they also struggle enormously just to find qualified staff to work in those healthcare settings. So we, like many states, have an acute shortage in healthcare workers. So we really began to think a number of years ago with partners. We talked to a lot of hospitals. We talked to our large health systems, UAB, USA, Huntsville, and thought about, okay, what can we do to create a workforce pipeline? Now, the issue is multifaceted, but one thing we landed on was, well, how about a specialty healthcare high school located in a rural area that can partner and locate adjacent to a rural hospital so that they have students have hands-on experience during their curriculum and their time. Graduate those students, partner with the two-year system and have credential opportunities, but graduate those students that they are ready to go back in immediately to the healthcare workforce. During those high school students' residency in the healthcare high school, they'll have the summertime opportunity to go back and intern with the hospitals back in their areas. So you're talking about a world-class education in a rural setting focused on healthcare-oriented professions with hands-on experience in a rural hospital. So you really put a lot of the ingredients together to create a workforce pipeline that will go back to rural areas. Now, some of those students will go on and seek higher degrees, whether those are in nursing or go on to be physicians. But the real focus, I think, in my judgment at least, is to give rural kids, some of who don't have a lot of school choice. You know, we've talked a lot about school choice lately. We have a lot of rural districts that don't have school choice effectively around the state of Alabama, all over the state. So give those kids a choice, an opportunity to come to a world-class setting in a rural area and receive a specialized education. So it's been a priority of the governor. She's been very clear about that for 2 consecutive years. We're extremely pleased that the legislature chose to authorize and fund with initial funding the healthcare high school. The effort has raised substantial external money, almost $30 million externally. I think those funding raising efforts will continue. So really, I think if you step back and look at it, it is a proposal that has enormous depth of concept. There's been a lot of work on curriculum, a lot of feasibility studies, but it is an opportunity for Alabama to not only address a challenge we have in rural Alabama, whether it's healthcare, education, workforce opportunities, but to be a national model in many respects. So I think it is a wonderful opportunity for our state. I think it is a wonderful opportunity for rural kids who want to have choices, rural kids who want to have really effective, good positive careers in their rural settings. Those healthcare jobs are good jobs. They pay well. They provide benefits. And in some rural areas of Alabama, that's rare or even unique sometimes. So creating those opportunities benefits everybody in every corner of the state. So we're extremely excited about it. Thankful, virtually every hospital in the state is supporting the effort, has signed on to accept interns. We will lean on those hospitals to help recruit students. Hospitals that employ nurses and doctors may have children in those areas that would be very interested in a school like this. So the effort is underway in earnest now to continue with the stand-up of that school. But I think it is one of, as you think about Governor Ivey, as you think about this legislature and the investments made in recent years, this can be one of the most significant and transformative, and I think everybody in the state of Alabama should be excited and committed to success.
How was the feedback from the delegation as you explained this vision in Washington?
Well, it was very positive because every member of our congressional district knows we are struggling as it relates to health care generally in Alabama, but particularly in rural areas. And each member of the delegation represents rural areas and has rural hospitals and rural citizens that they're hearing from. So very positive. I think folks want to learn more and hear more, but a lot of excitement.
Mm-hmm. That's great. We look forward to covering it more and more, and thanks for that explanation. Another initiative you're involved in, Innovate Alabama. We saw some news here recently about grants coming out. This is federally funded grants going to small business. Talk about the significance of this.
Well, it is a very significant grant opportunity. So Innovate Alabama's mission and scope and purpose is fairly large as it relates to growing the technology, entrepreneurial innovation, and research sector of our economy. The world's changing. Technology is transforming everything, and Alabama has to have a seat at that table as it relates to that sector of our economy. As here again, as industries that we know them are disrupted by technology, how does Alabama maintain a competitive position in that arena? But as part of that, Innovate Alabama has attracted a $98 million federal grant. It's called SSBCI, the State Small Business Credit Initiative. It is the largest funding opportunity for small business lending in the state of Alabama's history. So very excited, just beginning to roll out the program. but it will cover small businesses all across the state of Alabama. It will create lending opportunities to leverage other private financing to support these small businesses that are seeking credit. There will be some investment to pair with investing partners as it relates to small businesses. All federal money, all subject to the federal Treasury guidelines, but we're excited to roll it out to the effect of, we think a lot of times when we think about economic development about large manufacturing, and we love to go cut a ribbon on a manufacturing facility that has 500 jobs. But it's harder sometimes to figure out how to support small businesses, because small businesses are really the backbone of our economy. They're the backbones of our communities. They sponsor the youth sporting programs. They're in the church pews every Sunday. But there are thousands of them, and they're disparate, and it's not quite as easy to, from a policy standpoint, sometimes assist them. So to be able to leverage this federal program to present the largest funding opportunity for small business in the state of Alabama's history, I'm very excited about.
And so if a small business wants to apply for these grants, it's innovatealabama.org.
That's right. There'll be some click-through opportunities at that core website to push towards the SSBCI credit program.
Okay. Well, speaking of websites, there's also a new website for the outdoor recreation. That's a big component of Innovate Alabama, and one that maybe was unexpected from me at how interested, especially younger people who we want to attract, are in our outdoor recreation activities, whether it's hiking or all the lakes and rivers and things like that. So it's seekalabama.com is where people can go to see all those recreational opportunities.
Well, they can, and none of us really foresaw that outdoor recreation would be a significant discussion point when the Innovation Commission was formed, that later gave rise to forming Innovate Alabama to carry out that mission. But what is clear is, this is an opportunity for Alabama. We have an abundance of natural resources. We have lots of outdoor recreational activity. They're very diverse: biking, hiking, swimming, fishing, kayaking. You name it. Bird watching, hunting. You name it. We have it in Alabama. But we've never had a centralized website or other location that folks can go to find information. So what is clear is we can use this as a recruitment and a retention tool. By identifying these sites, investing in those sites, coordinating the state's investments in a structured and strategic way as it relates to outdoor recreation, promoting that inside the state and outside. But it's a great opportunity for our citizens. So this is an effort that not only can our current citizens really pay attention to and connect into from a quality of life standpoint, it's become clear it can be a very powerful engine for economic development and the recruitment and retention of talent. So really excited about the site. A lot of hard work has gone into it. Chris Blankenship at the Department of Conservation and Natural Resources deserves enormous credit for partnering with that. But the asset map is incredible. The site is continuing to become more and more robust as more opportunities are uploaded. But it's a real opportunity to showcase the state of Alabama.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll put that up on the screen. Well, we're out of time, but thanks again for coming on the show.
Thanks, Todd.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online anytime at Alabama Public Television's website, aptv.org. Click on the Online Video tab on the main page. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. You're watching Alabama Public Television.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. Joining me next via Zoom from Washington, D.C. is John Rogers, a pollster with Signal. John, thanks for coming on the show.
Todd, great to be with you.
Can you remind our viewers, you've been on the show a couple of times before, but remind our viewers about Signal, its roots here in Alabama, and what you guys provide.
Sure, absolutely happy to do that. So we're a polling firm that was started in Montgomery, and a great majority of our team are from Alabama. And we do polling all across the country for Republican candidates. And so, we're fortunate to have some clients like Governor Greg Abbott of Texas and Governor Brian Kemp of Georgia are clients. And so 2024 has been a busy year, as you can imagine.
Well, yeah, and that's why I wanted to have you on because, we all saw that debate last week, and some people argue that presidential debates don't always matter all that much. I think it's fair to say that this one mattered. It was pretty shocking in terms of the president's performance and how that's kind of impacting the race. And everybody's been eager, or at least, political junkies like me have been eager to see how exactly that debate may move the numbers, right? Because you got to wait a little bit, do some proper polling. So now y'all have done some polling this week to look into that. What did you see in terms of any kind of movement in the presidential race based on your survey?
We did a national survey that was conducted on Monday and Tuesday of this week. And so you had the debate, which was on Thursday, give it a couple of days for people to kind of figure out what they thought of the debate, and then also to see clips that may be circulating on social media. And what we found is that majority of people who watched the debate said that they believe that President Trump was the clear winner. And what's really interesting is 74% of independents and even a quarter of Democrats said that they thought that Trump won the debate.
That's significant. Well, what's the horse race looking like? Because I saw some of the numbers you sent. It looked to me, I mean, I'm not an expert pollster, but it looked to me that there was a spike in Trump's favor from June to July.
Sure. So in June, and this is a national survey that we've been doing for over 2 years now. We do it every month. And so in June, President Trump led the head-to-head presidential ballot by just 2 points over President Biden. And then that has shifted to be 48 to 43, where Trump has a 5 point lead now in the head-to-head ballot over President Biden. So you can tell this is not a debate. There are a lot of debates that really don't impact the course of the race. This is going to be one that is going to be remembered for a long time, and it is already starting to have a pretty dramatic effect.
Mm-hmm. Well, I know you tried to ascertain from respondents, from voters, like maybe who had their mind changed by a debate. I mean, at this point, everybody seems to be kind of in their partisan corners, but what did you find out in terms of did anybody switch their vote or go from undecided to supporting a candidate?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're right. We live in an era of extreme polarization. And so most people know they're Republicans and they're voting for Trump, or they're a Democrat and they're voting for Biden. And there's really not too many voters who are in the middle. But you did have 7% of voters in our poll who said that they were undecided going into the debate, or that they were planning to vote for President Biden, and that they've shifted and now they say that they plan to vote for President Trump. 7% may not seem like a lot, but it really matters in a close presidential race, and it'll also really matter, especially if those voters vote down ticket for Republicans in some of the key battleground states.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, on the margins, that's where the races are won, right? I mean, and I do want to talk about some of those battleground states and other races here in a bit. But I also thought it was interesting that I mean, every poll has, tests candidates' image, right? How favorable voters view you or how unfavorable voters view you. Some pretty alarming numbers for Biden in terms of his unfavorability, above 60. I mean, that's a lot. But what also struck me is Trump is also unpopular. His numbers are sitting up in the 50s. So you've got both presidential candidates, including the current president and the former president, underwater in terms of more people view them unfavorably than favorably, and yet these are the candidates.
Right. The impact of the debate is that I don't know that anybody in their lifetime has seen a candidate, especially a sitting president, struggle that much on a debate stage. And so it's not that Trump has all of a sudden become much more popular, but you have a large segment of voters who just really are starting to have doubts about Biden's ability to serve in a second term. I mean, he would be 86 by the time he finished a second term. And that's why we see in our national poll that 62% of voters have an unfavorable view of President Biden, which is the highest number that we found in 2 years, including 51% of Americans who have a very unfavorable view of Biden. And so just the weakness and the struggles that he displayed on the debate stage really are continuing to are starting to affect him, and you're seeing it in the numbers.
What about, I know you test like demographics, right? Because ahead of every poll, you ask things like, what's your age, what's your gender, what's your race, and things like that, even like college degrees and all kinds of demographic factors. I'm curious if you saw any shifts in the demographics, significant shifts in any of those demographics, one way or the other.
Yeah, there were two groups that stood out. And so for among Black men, Trump's share on the ballot from June to July to the survey that we just did, his ballot share increased by 5 points, while Biden's ballot share dropped by 17 points. So that would be a net 22-point swing among African-American men. And that's driven by young African-American men, where Biden's share has dropped by 30 points looking from June into July. And so it's not that Trump is going to win a majority of the African American vote, or even of African American men. But if Biden's share and his support in that community continues to erode as much as it has, Biden is not going to win North Carolina. He's not going to win Georgia. And it also is going to affect states even in the Midwest, like Pennsylvania, where you have large African American communities and cities like Philadelphia.
Wow, that is significant. And what that makes me think of, you're talking about some battleground states and maybe even some Senate races. But right here in Alabama, we have a key race, a true toss-up race. I mean, I think all things being equal, it should be a Democratic seat. Maybe, well, let's call it leans Democrat in the second district, Alabama's second district, this brand new district that was drawn by the courts. So, but it's a battleground. It's a true toss-up. And so what you just said about African American, shifting their vote, that could have an impact here, because voter enthusiasm, we all know voter enthusiasm is going to have a big impact on that race. So could you see that being a factor in this race, considering the Democrats really need that African American vote to be enthusiastic and to show up at the polls for Shamari Figures to be successful?
Absolutely. The map of battleground districts is expanding. And so, whereas if Biden was leading in the presidential ballot and was seen as a strong president and a strong candidate, a district like Alabama 2 might be pretty difficult for a Republican to win. But that's not the case. Biden's numbers are dismal. And as we just talked about, they're dismal among African American men. And so in a district like the second congressional district of Alabama, Republicans have a real shot. There's a really strong candidate who's a Republican nominee. And so that is a district where you're going to see a lot of resources that Republicans are going to pour into the district. And I think that it's going to be a tight race come November.
And maybe that's one big reason why there are so many calling on President Biden to step aside, to say, look, this is a problem, and we need. The Democrats are saying we need to keep the White House, but they're also looking down ballot at those Senate races, at the congressional races, at that voter enthusiasm gap. And so that begs the question, if somehow that was going to be the case, in the hypothetical that President Biden, voluntarily said, I'm going to not run for re-election, then the most natural choice would be the vice president, right? Kamala Harris. She's had her own issues over the years in terms of image and visibility and everything. I know you did some polling on that. What did you take away in terms of her viability should she replace the president as the nominee?
You're right. In circles in Washington, D.C., and I think across the country, Democrats are really casting about. They were doing it privately right after Thursday, and now much more publicly, and even had a Democratic congressional member from Texas who called for Biden to step aside. But the issue is that the vice president is not popular. In our poll, national poll, only 35% of voters have a favorable view of the vice president. And so it could be that she would do a little bit better than President Biden, just given the fact of his age and his, struggles, being able to perform kind of on the campaign trail. But she is not a silver bullet for Democrats. And so they are really in a tough position, because even if Biden decides to voluntarily step aside, there's not a clear-cut candidate that they can go to.
It's fascinating stuff in this political year. I know we wanted to get to those battlegrounds. I know y'all have done some polling, or maybe you're in the middle of doing some polling on those battleground states. I'm thinking Arizona, Georgia, North Carolina, Wisconsin, Michigan. Those are the states that will probably decide the election, right? You could throw Nevada in there. I know it may not be finished yet, but what have you seen preliminarily from those battleground states in terms of trends and shifts?
Right. So in those battleground states, and for the viewers, Republicans need to win 2 Senate seats to have a clear majority in the U.S. Senate, no matter what happens at the top of the presidential ticket, and no matter which party controls the vice president, who would have the tie-breaking vote in the U.S. Senate. So Republicans are going to win West Virginia, which gives Republicans one of the 2. And so they need to find the second one in a state like Montana or Ohio, or in potentially even Pennsylvania. And so in our battleground, our survey that we just concluded of 39 different congressional battleground districts, we found that Republicans have the edge on the generic ballot at R+3. That's where we just asked, if the election were held today, would you be more likely to vote for the Republican or the Democratic candidate for Congress? And that is a really substantial edge. Again, most of the country has decided, so leading by 3 points in the generic ballot is a strong sign for the Republicans. 61% of voters in those 39 battleground districts, 61% have an unfavorable view of President Biden. Trump leads on the head-to-head ballot by 7 points over Biden, which is the largest share, the largest margin that Trump has had in our polling so far in this battleground poll. And then of voters in those battleground districts who watched the debate, only 10% said that they believe that Joe Biden won the debate.
You mentioned that the generic ballot. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought that traditionally, just over the years and decades, haven't Democrats typically had an advantage as it comes to just when you poll nationally on generic ballots? I'm a little surprised to see that Republicans now have an advantage.
Right. It generally is a measure that tends to favor the Democrats. And even going back to our national survey, which we've been talking about for most of this time, on last month's national survey, it was dead even. And now in our national survey that we just concluded, Republicans have a 4-point advantage. And so that's where you start to see for months now, Trump has been doing well in some of these battleground states, especially Georgia and Nevada and North Carolina, and also the Midwestern states. But you've seen that the Republican nominees for Senate, for instance, have trailed sometimes the Democratic nominees by 3 to 4 points. But this shift towards Republicans from being dead even in June to a 4-point advantage now in July is going to have downstream effects in those races in Pennsylvania, for instance, where Dave McCormick is facing off against Bob Casey. And you're really going to have the Democratic nominees who are going to be faced with a conundrum where Biden is a bit of an albatross around their neck, an anvil around their neck. But obviously, if you're a Democratic nominee, it's a little bit of an awkward thing to privately or certainly publicly ask the sitting president of your party to step aside.
For sure. And I mean, some really fascinating data. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing. But it's also just July. We've got 4 months, and so much can happen. We've got conventions coming up. We've got a lot going on. A long way to go in this race, and really all the races. John, thanks again for coming on, and we look forward to catching up with you as the campaign goes along.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
We'll be right back.
You can watch past episodes of Capital Journal online at video.aptv.org. Capital Journal episodes are also available on APTV's free mobile app. You can also connect with Capital Journal and link to past episodes on Capital Journal's Facebook page. And you can listen to past episodes of Capital Journal when you're driving or on the go with Capital Journal Podcasts.
Welcome back to Capital Journal. Joining me next is Alan Miller, president of the American Village in Montevallo and the second president of the United States, John Adams. Mr. President, thanks for coming on the show.
Well, I appreciate the honor of having me here to speak on something that I'm very passionate about.
That is the 4th of July. We celebrated the 4th of July this week. It's a really special holiday for me and all Americans, but it's got a special significance for you. You helped craft that Declaration of Independence and get it through the Continental Congress. Talk about the significance of the 4th of July.
Well, this was and is still a remarkable achievement. There has been no revolution like this in any of the history of the world at this point. And it was no small feat to have the 13 colonies, 13 clocks striking precisely at the same time. As you can imagine, it is difficult for Congress to agree on anything. But we all saw the importance of transitioning from a people that was subject to a king to a people that could be self-governing. And we saw ourselves not merely as British subjects, but as Americans.
Absolutely fascinating. And Alan, talk about the American Village. I think a lot of Alabamians are familiar and have been to visit, but it's really seen a lot of growth over the years. Talk about that. Talk about where the American Village has come and where you are planning to go in the future.
Well, you're right, Todd, and thank you for having us on. The Village really is just an incredibly fun place to come, bring the family, and learn about America's founding history and the Declaration of Independence. This is our 25th anniversary, and throughout that time, we've continued to grow. This all started in the imagination of our founder, Tom Walker. And I tell people frequently, it's very difficult to describe what you see when you get there. But once you're on campus, you're just absolutely blown away with the level of dedication, the commitment, and the vision that Tom had for American Village. What's going on right now is we're experiencing great growth. We've had a lot of help from the legislature. We're in the process of completing our Independence Hall replica. And so when that's finished, we'll have Massachusetts represented. We call this the Hall of Grievances, where people learn about all of the British oppression that people were experiencing in the colony of Massachusetts at the time. There's a 30-minute film called Choosing to Be an American People that really impresses upon people the fact that this is a decision that we continue to have to make as Americans. We have to choose to take up our responsibilities as Americans to keep the Republic. As the audience moves into the central portion of Independence Hall, which is still currently under construction, they will see a portrait gallery, which suddenly will come to life. They will see that King George's portrait has been removed from the wall and placed into a packing crate, and he starts to yell at the audience to get him back up on the wall where he belongs. And a number of founders engaging in discussion and debate about the importance of declaring independence from Great Britain. And then finally, the audience will be called into the assembly room where they'll have an opportunity to vote for or against independence. Mm-hmm. In the final portion of that building, we've reached an agreement with the Harrison family out of Columbiana, Alabama. A lot of people are not aware that the George Washington Museum in Columbiana, Alabama is actually the second largest collection of George and Martha Washington artifacts outside of Mount Vernon. And we struck an agreement with the Harrison family earlier this year to bring that collection to American Village to be housed in that new building. And so we're very happy to have Massachusetts, Pennsylvania, and Virginia all represented at Independence Hall.
That's very cool. I know y'all had a huge 4th of July celebration this week, probably exhausted from that. But I love the characters because you've got, Ben Franklin, George Washington. Go through some of the, obviously John Adams, go through some of the characters.
Oh, we've got a number of characters. You named some of the most prominent ones, of course, George Washington, John Adams, Alexander Hamilton, James Armistead Lafayette is a new character that we have this year. And it's an incredibly successful event. We throw everything that we've got at the audience on Independence Day. And so it's just a great day to come, be reminded that we truly are the greatest country on the face of the planet because of our liberty. And it not only freed people throughout our own history, but it has freed people across the world. And I think it's important for us to come together and remember that we may all have different views, but we are all Americans. And we need to make sure that we are reminding ourselves of the importance of coming together as Americans and being proud of who we are and what we stand for.
Mm-hmm. Well, I have to go back to Mr. Adams of Massachusetts to ask, you know, we are so fortunate as Americans. But take me back to 1776. What do we today maybe take for granted that y'all went through back then at the founding?
I think that one of the primary issues that people might not understand is that we are not these men of myth and legend. We are flesh and blood. We are farmers. We are lawyers. We are normal people, ordinary people that were placed under an extraordinary circumstance and given an extraordinary opportunity. And I think that is something that I would like to impress upon anyone, is that differences can be made by people. They do not have to be a grand statesman, so to speak. We do not start out that way. We are given a circumstance, and we choose whether or not we will overcome that circumstance or not. And we, fortunately, decided to overcome these shackles of tyranny and oppression.
Mm-hmm. All right, if I can ask you to break character for a second. Your real name is James Kitchens. You're an actor at the American Village. Thank you for doing your character, because that's really fun for the audience. But I am curious, because all these kids come through, all these school children that are learning about this history, and they're fascinated to see all y'all's characters and experience that. But what's it like from your point of view? Because you're seeing all of them come through, you're seeing the looks on their faces. What's it like from an actor's perspective?
So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun to see the kids have a lot of fun, and to kind of, when the kids do have that experience of getting the message, and you see those things click in their head, it's a very rewarding experience. Mm-hmm. I say all the time that I have the best job in the world.
Yeah.
So, and I really do mean that. It's a great opportunity to impress upon people the importance of civics and the importance of, as President Adams said, that these were ordinary people. And when you come to the American Village, you don't just get the well-known figures of the Revolution. You get much smaller figures that had a very important part to play in, whether they were spying, whether they were giving information from the British to the American soldiers. You get a lot of those smaller figures, and I think that impresses upon that idea is that everybody is important, and that there is nobody too small, that so many people came together because of a belief and an idea that they did not have to be subjects to a king, mm-hmm. that they could be self-governing.
Yeah, so important to make sure our young people understand that history and know that history, mm-hmm. and it's not lost. I'm thinking of things like the Hamilton musical, of culturally significant. Do you think that maybe that made a difference in terms of more people trying to learn about and understand why the founding was so important? Do you think that might have had an impact?
I certainly do think that it had an impact, and that's something that we try to continue at American Village. I think sometimes people wonder, because we've become so well known for the incredible field trips. I think sometimes people wonder, will this translate? Will this type of entertaining education translate to a family trip at American Village? And as James was talking, I was reminded that earlier this year we actually had a group of Marines come through. And they were sitting in the chapel during the opening play, and the kids were so fired up about protesting the Stamp Act before they left there. As we're walking outside, I mean, you can feel the walls vibrating. They're that excited to start the day. The first sergeant kind of stopped me and said, "Wow, they were really, really blown away with the quality of the play, the excitement of the kids. The Marines themselves had a great time, but I think most importantly, they were so excited to see that this was going on, that the children were getting this kind of an education. I can't tell you how many times I serve in the Marine Corps Reserve, and that, you know, young men and women raise their right hand and swear to support and defend this Constitution. They don't know what's in it. They don't know how it's structured. And it's not just for servicemen and women, it's everyone. We all have an obligation to know the Declaration of Independence, to be familiar with the Constitution so that we can actively participate in keeping the Republic. It's vitally important.
Absolutely. Well, share with our viewers what they need to know in terms of how to find the American Village. Website, what's the best way to go experience it?
We have a website at americanvillage.org, and we are located in Montevallo, Alabama, just south of Birmingham. We are open from 10 to 4. In the summer, it's Tuesday through Saturday. We wanted to make sure that we had Saturdays available. During the school year, it's Monday through Friday. Open from 10 to 4, admission $11. And you can easily enjoy an 8-hour experience at American Village.
Well, I certainly encourage all our viewers to go. I'm pretty confident most of them have been already. Well, gentlemen, thank you all so much for coming and sharing this, and congratulations on another successful 4th of July.
Thank you very much, Todd. Thanks for having us.
We'll be right back.
The 375,000 acres that make up the 3 ranger districts of Talladega National Forest were purchased by the federal government in 1936 as part of an effort to restore clear-cut timberlands and farmlands no longer capable of producing crops. The beautiful reserve includes the 102-mile Pinhoti National Trail System and Alabama's highest and second highest points, Mount Cheaha and Duggar Mountain.
That's our show for this week. Thanks for watching. Next week, we have Spotlight on Education coming on Thursday night at 8 o'clock here on APT. And we'll be back with Capital Journal at 7:30 on Friday night right here on Alabama Public Television. For our Capital Journal team, I'm Todd Stacy. We'll see you next time.